When you think of the American Revolution, what pops into your head? Boston, maybe? Philadelphia? Sure. But what if I told you the whole thing was pretty much won and lost right in New Jersey? Yeah, New Jersey. Let's dig into this story, because it's one that often gets overlooked.
So why was New Jersey called the Crossroads of the Revolution? And trust me, this wasn't just some catchy nickname somebody made up. It's a title that was earned through a whole lot of blood, some brilliant strategy, and honestly, just sheer geographic luck. By the time we're done here, you're going to get exactly why.
Okay, to really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number, 600. That's how many battles and skirmishes, big and small, happened in New Jersey during the war. 600. That's more than any other state. This wasn't some sideshow, you guys. This was the main event. All right, so let's break down what this Crossroads of the Revolution thing really means.
Think of it this way. New Jersey was basically the hallway of the war. It was literally stuck right between the two most important cities back then, the British fortress of New York City and the American capital down in Philadelphia. So armies were constantly marching through, fighting over every inch of it and trying to live off the land.
So why New Jersey? Well, it boils down to a few really key things. First, that central location we just talked about, that was everything. But also, this is where George Washington himself spent a huge chunk of his time running the war. And as we're about to see, it became the stage for some of the most critical turning points of the entire conflict.
But, looking at big strategic maps doesn't really tell you the whole story. To really understand what the war felt like, you have to get on the ground. So that's what we're going to do. We're zooming in on one city, Newark, to see how this massive conflict played out in the streets and in the homes of regular people.
Okay, so welcome to Newark, a city that found itself right in the thick of the fighting, in a place where the war got very, very personal and often pretty brutal.
For Newark, things got bad fast. First, in late 1776, a totally exhausted General Washington and his army had to retreat right through the city. A few years later, the British came back, but this time with a vengeance. They'd launched these raids from New York, burning down the local academy, targeting the homes of known patriots. For the people living here, the war wasn't some distant headline. It was literally at their front door.
So let's meet some of the people who actually lived through all this chaos. We're talking about fiery preachers, world-changing writers, and families who ended up paying the ultimate price for their beliefs.
This is Alexander McWhorter. He was the minister at Newark's First Presbyterian Church. And this quote from a historian really says it all. Despising the British came easily to McWhorter. He wasn't just some passive observer. He was a passionate patriot. His family had a history with the British, and he used his pulpit to inspire his congregation to join the cause.
And right in the middle of all this, another huge revolutionary figure shows up. It's Thomas Paine. As he's retreating with Washington's beaten-down army, he starts writing the American Crisis, right there in Newark. You know the famous lines, "These are the times that try men's souls." Yeah, those were written to rally a nearly broken army right in the heart of the chaos.
But for some folks, the war was just terrifying. Which brings us to the story of Judge Joseph Hedden. He was a prominent patriot, a big name in the area. And one cold winter night in 1780, the redcoats showed up at his house.
As the soldiers tried to force their way inside, his wife, she stood right in their path to stop them. For her bravery, she was brutally bayoneted. Incredibly, she survived, but the horror was just getting started.
The sheer cruelty of what they did next is just staggering. They pulled Judge Hedden from his sickbed and dragged him out into the freezing winter night wearing only his nightgown. This wasn't just about capturing him. It was about terror and humiliation.
They forced him on this brutal march all the way to a prison in New York. The exposure, the harsh conditions, it just destroyed his health. He was eventually released, but he was a broken man. He died shortly after getting back home. I mean, his story just shows the immense personal cost of this war.
And it's exactly this kind of desperation, the retreat through Newark, the suffering of families like the Heddens, that really forced George Washington's hand. He knew the revolution was on the ropes. It was failing. He absolutely needed a win, and he needed it now. This desperation led to one of the boldest gambles of the entire war. So let's just pause and look at the situation here. You've got the Continental Army. They're freezing, their morale is in the gutter, and their numbers are dwindling every single day. And on the other side, you've got the well-fed, well-equipped British and their hired German soldiers, the Hessians, who are feeling pretty confident. The odds were, well, they were terrible, completely stacked against Washington.
Washington's plan was nothing short of genius, and it wasn't just one battle. It was a whole sequence of brilliant, super risky moves. He kicks it off with that famous Christmas crossing of the Delaware for a surprise attack on Trenton. Then he manages to hold off a massive British counterattack. Then he uses a small decoy force to trick the enemy while his main army slips away in the dead of night. And for the final blow, he marches to Princeton and hits the British again. It was an absolute masterpiece of military strategy.
And the result of that very first move at Trenton, it was unbelievable. Just look at these numbers. The Americans lost only 2 men, and they died from the cold, not from fighting. Meanwhile, they captured over 900 Hessian soldiers. It was an almost impossibly lopsided victory.
So what was the real impact of these 10 crazy, crucial days in New Jersey? Well, it was nothing less than saving the entire revolution.
These wins at Trenton and Princeton were the turning point. They gave the Continental Army a massive shot in the arm, a huge morale boost. It pushed the British out of most of New Jersey, and maybe most important of all, it restored everyone's faith in George Washington as a leader. The revolution, which had been on the brink of collapse, was suddenly back in the game.
And all of this kind of leaves us with a bigger thought, right? The grand, sweeping story of a nation's founding was written in the streets of small towns like Newark and on the frozen battlefields of places like Trenton. It really makes you wonder how many other huge national histories are just hiding there in the stories of a single town, waiting to be told.